So we pick up at Acts 28, verse 11, and Luke's travel log continues, I guess, if you will, or it reaches another phase. I found in a BibleCharts.org Paul's journey to Rome. The approximate distance of this journey was 2,130 miles. Just this journey to Rome. Of course, most of that is sea miles in the Mediterranean. This particular part of the text deals with that last 515 miles of the journey. So they've been on Malta for 3 months, and they find another grain ship. I say another grain ship, another Alexandrian ship that is going to Rome. We presume it was a grain ship that had wintered at Malta, even though it was just a few hundred miles away from Rome, because the weather got bad. It got into that season of time when they did not sail on the Mediterranean because of the weather. It starts out by telling us that the ship had the figurehead of Castor and Pollux. It doesn't say that, it says the twin brothers as the figurehead. And that's kind of important because Castor and Pollux were considered gods of sailors. So there might be in this group of 276 that would get on the ship and think, oh, fortune is with us. This ship is dedicated to the honor of Castor and Pollux, the patron of sailors. Now, we don't exactly know the dates here, but usually sailing on the Mediterranean doesn't start up in the ancient times until around March the 10th. It can start as early as February the 8th. We don't know the date, but it's presumed mostly by things that you read that this was February. 3 months. They've been there since December, January, and into February, or November, December, and January. So the time frame is maybe February. So they go from Malta to Syracuse, which is on Sicily. Again, nothing is said about what they did here much, except they stayed there 3 days, probably unloading, loading cargo. Just speculation. Well, from Syracuse on Sicily, they go to a place called Regina. That still exists today as Reggio Calabria in Italy. And this city is associated with the worship of Castor and Pollux. Again, these pagan, if you call them pagan, sailors would think, hey, this is good. We're getting along the journey. And they might have also thought this was good fortune because they had to sail through the Strait of Messina. And in the Strait of Messina, there are two obstacles to sailing. One is a rock that has the name Scylla, and another is a whirlpool that has the name of Charybdis. And I butchered that name. Ever heard the saying, a rock in a hard place? This is where the idea comes from. And it's in Greek mythology. And this is where we get those names. So maybe they felt they were delivered because they were on the ship that was dedicated to Castor and Pollux. When they get to Rhegium, they go to Puteoli. This is the main port for the grain ships between Rome and Egypt. It's 8 miles northwest of Naples. And they spend 7 days here in Puteoli. Paul is allowed to visit friends, family, members of the church, and they stay there 7 days. Again, this shows the kindness of Julius to Paul. Puteoli is about 150 miles from Rome. So from here, they start on the Appian Way, and they come to a place called the Appia Forum, which is 45 miles from Rome. And there's a group of Christians that have come from Rome to meet Paul. They will come to meet Paul, and they will go back to Rome with Paul. This is, in a sense, the greeting of a dignitary. This is what you would expect if the emperor came to your town. Prominent members of the town, even commoners from the town, would go out to greet the emperor and welcome him into the city. We still have that kind of stuff today. And to kind of get a little crazy here, this is the same idea that's expressed in 1 Thessalonians when it talks about meeting Christ at the second coming. We're meeting him to usher him in to our world. So, there's some more that meet at the 3 taverns. This is approximately 10 miles from Rome. Or 10 miles from Appius. It's 35 miles from Rome. So we're getting closer. So Paul has long desired to come to Rome. He's expressed that in passages like Romans 1, 9 through 11. Acts 19:21 says he's going to Jerusalem and then he must see Rome. In Romans 15, 23 through 29, he expresses the idea that the Roman Christians would then send him on his way to Spain. In Acts 23, verse 11, he is assured that he will bear witness in Rome. In Acts 27, I forgot the verse. 27, 23 through 25. He is assured that he will present the gospel before Caesar. So Paul is in Rome. Let's back up a minute and talk about the encouragement that he received from that group of Christians that came to meet him. He's possibly feeling alone, discouraged. After all, he's been confined for close to 3, going on 4 years. The usual things that he does in ministry haven't been happening. And so maybe he's wondering a little bit what kind of a reception will he receive in Rome. But here's this group of Christians that came out to welcome him, and he thanked God and was encouraged. He thanked God for this welcome. I don't think Paul anticipated coming to Rome as a prisoner. Romans, the Gospel of Romans, the Epistle of the Romans would not indicate that. But he came to Rome. Verse 16, part of the verse that's in the King James Version is not in most modern translations. But it says, when we came into Rome, the centurion delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard. Paul was allowed to live by himself with the soldier who was guarding him. There is a guy named Burrus, who was in charge of the Praetorian Guard at this time. And one of his responsibilities under his command was the person who would take care of the prisoners that were waiting to be tried before the emperor's court. This Burrus, by the way, died in AD 62 by the invitation of Nero. In other words, he is purged. Along with Nero's teacher, Seneca. Notice what this says. Paul was allowed to live by himself with the soldier who guarded him. Verse 30 says it was in a rented house. And this may imply that Paul continued to work as tent maker at this time. He was able to welcome all who came to see him. He proclaimed the kingdom of God, teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. So Paul continued many of the things he did as the apostle to the Gentiles. He continued those even though he was in prison. And he had a captive audience. He had a captive audience. Because when visitors would come and he would talk about the Gospels to the visitors, who else heard about it?
The guard that was chained to him.
The guard that was chained to him. That guard changed every 4 to 6 hours. So one would leave, another would come. Captive audience. In the book of Philippians, it tells us that the gospel even penetrated the Praetorian Guard, the household of Caesar. I don't exactly know what.
Greg, it seems to be a contradiction to me that, Paul gave his defense as a Roman citizen, but all through this, he's treated like a criminal.
Yeah.
That seems to be a contradiction. I'm not sure about the particulars in Roman law, but he's still in prison.
Yep.
And he's still guarded. But as you mentioned there, he is probably able to do more and contact more people by the situation he's in than he would if he was.
Yes. And your point there, how does he perceive his imprisonment when you read the letters of Ephesians, Colossians, and Philippians? He's not imprisoned by Rome. He's a prisoner for the Lord. So, yes, that plays a big role in it. He is still in custody of Rome.
One of them was to protect his life as well.
Yes.
So, but he still was restricted.
Yes.
Because of everything in protected custody.
Right. In verses 17 through 19 of this, 17 through 21, at 29, he does something that he says is paramount. Romans 1, 16 and 17, where's the gospel to go first? To the Jews. Who does he meet with after 3 days in Rome? The Jews. He never leaves that concept behind. The gospel is to go to the Jews. So 3 days after he arrives in Rome, I don't know what he did in those 3 days. Rested up from the journey, made preparation for where he was going to stay for the next bit. I don't know how much freedom he had in choosing the place, but it says it was a rented house. He meets with the leaders of the Jewish synagogues. There were several in Rome at that time. I think several is probably the better word. I ran across one place that said there were 7, but I don't know. So there were several synagogue leaders that came and talked with him. And notice that Paul summarizes why he is in prison. he makes the point that Rome would have let him go. But the Jews in Judea, Jerusalem, were not receptive to this idea. So therefore, he appealed to Caesar. But even in this, he says, I didn't do anything against our people or against our customs. He was still very much a Jew. And it's ironic that Paul was going to the temple to practice a Jewish custom, paying for a vow, when he was arrested. So, he does nothing against the people or the customs. And he doesn't bring a countersuit against the Jews. But he says he is bound because of the hope of Israel. And the hope of Israel was the coming of the Messiah. He believes Jesus is that Messiah. And that was his teaching. That Christianity is rooted in this hope of Israel, the coming of Messiah. Any brand of Christianity that does not connect with the Old Testament hope of the coming of Messiah is suspect. And in fact, it's probably dangerous. Verse 21. Probably sets the stage for an acquittal. It probably sets the stage of acquittal because apparently those in Jerusalem, Judea, have not or are not going to send a delegation to make their point against Paul. Notice what the Jewish leaders said there. Verse 21. They replied, "We have received no letters from Judea about you, and none of the brothers coming here has reported or spoken anything evil about you." So, here's some things to keep in mind. The case against Paul was weak. It was brought to Felix, Festus, and before Agrippa. All would have released him, except that he had appealed to Caesar. And that was his right as a Roman citizen. Another thing to keep in mind, in about AD 49, Claudius had expelled all Jews from Rome. When he died in AD 54, the Jews were allowed to come back. Perhaps those in Judea and those Jews in Rome didn't want to bring any attention to the past, that they were troublemakers. Now, actually, the reason for the expulsion seems to be the tensions between Jews and those Jewish Christians. So they didn't want to bring any attention to that. So another reason that they might wait or might not have us done anything is they're assured Paul would be confined for at least 2 years, just simply because of the process. The paperwork takes a while. There's many on that wanting to appeal before Caesar. And if they didn't get to it in 2 years, he was free to go. So they were assured that he was going to be out of their hair for 2 years. And if the prosecution failed to put in an appearance within 2 years, it lost by default. So their case was weak. They knew he was out of the way for 2 years. They knew their case was weak, so they didn't even go through the motions. Another couple of points. The reason they might not have pursued this at this point. Nero has not married Poppaea Sabina yet. She was a Jew. She becomes his wife in AD 62. By the way, he will kick her to death while she is pregnant. So much for that. But she was an advocate for the Jews. So she wasn't in close proximity to do that at this point. Then also the Jews in Jerusalem, the Jewish leaders, they were also beginning to be caught up in the conflicts that will lead to the Jewish revolt in 68. Well, it starts before then. But they're getting caught up in those conflicts. And so their attention is there. And there may also be some evidence that those who brought unfounded charges against Roman citizens are punished. So, in this scenario, the Roman government, at least 3 times, I'm counting Agrippa as part of the Roman government, have said, no. He's not guilty of anything. So maybe we'll leave this alone. We got him out of the way. We'll leave this alone at this point. And maybe this was interruption to where I should have gone with that, but I found that interesting. So notice what he does in this meeting with, later. Starting with verse 23, he has scheduled a time for the Jews to come back and to discuss the sect that is everywhere spoken against. Which implies that at least there is some attention to Christianity within the Jewish community. That it is causing some conflict within the synagogues. Notice his points. Now, don't get the idea that Paul is preaching to them. Okay? This is a back and forth conversation that went on from morning to evening. I don't know how long we want to go in the evening or how early we want to start in the morning. If we use Roman customs, it could have started as early as 5 o'clock in the morning or earlier. And would have been finished by about 1 o'clock. But if we consider on that it went on till 6 or 7 in the afternoon, this is a long day. And Paul is talking to them about the kingdom of God. That Jesus is the Messiah. And he is doing this from what?
The Old Testament.
The Old Testament. He is doing this from Moses and the prophets. And as always, in the time of a presentation of the gospel, some believed, some disbelieved. Some believed, some disbelieved. And there was a dispute that rose among them between the believers and the unbelievers. Paul describes their rejection in terms of Isaiah 6, 9 through 10. And you read that. This is found in Isaiah's vision of God when King Uzziah died, and his being commissioned as the prophet. And he says, "Go to this people and say, you will indeed listen, but never understand. And you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes so that they might not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them." And then he says, "Let it be known to you then that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen." He explains this in terms of Isaiah 6, 9, and 10. But notice that this passage is used by Jesus in Matthew 13, 15. Mark 4:12, Luke 8:10. And it's interesting that its use there is when Jesus starts telling parables as his main method of teaching. You're going to hear, but you're not going to perceive or understand. You're going to see, but you're not going to perceive. So, with that in mind, I'll ask a question. Is the definition of a parable, that we sometimes use an earthly story to illustrate a heavenly meaning, is that really the best definition? Because in a way, it's saying, you're not going to see. Why are they not going to see? Because they do not want to see. Preachers that I listen to often, J. Vernon McGee, through the Bible broadcast. He says that when people start telling him, well, I have intellectual, by the way, told, since he's been dead for several years, tell him that they had intellectual doubts. He started asking them about their moral life. And he finds out that their moral life has more to do with it than their intellectual part of it. Again, you cannot convince people if they do not want to see. And that's Paul's point. Again, the passage is used in John 12:37 through 41. There is a difference between hearing and understanding, seeing and perceiving. Understanding and perceiving leads to change. So the message will go to the Gentiles. We've already talked about Paul's captive audience. Philippians 1:12 through 14 and Philippians 4:22 will make the point that it's in the Caesar's household. So it says that he received all who came to him. Think about some of the people that were with him. Aristarchus and Luke seem to be constant companions at this time. Luke is described as that beloved physician in Colossians 4:14. He's described as a fellow worker in Philippians 1:21. Aristarchus is identified as a Macedonian, and he was one of the church reps that went to Jerusalem with Paul. He is described as a fellow prisoner of Paul. These have been with him since he left Caesarea. Others that came to visit him, who came to be with him, Timothy, as referenced in Philippians 1:1, Colossians 1, and Philemon 1. Timothy was with him, and he was sent on errands by him. Epaphras from Colossae came to visit. Mark, Mark, that guy back in chapter 13 or so that caused the problem. Actually 15. And didn't the split. There was Demas, Epaphroditus, Jesus, Justus. These all came, visited, and were sent on errands. Paul wrote letters in this time period. He wrote the letter of Philemon, Colossians, and Ephesians. All of these letters glorify the Christ as the sovereign. He wrote Philippians, which was a thank you letter to the church at Philippi. The book of Acts ends abruptly. It doesn't tell us what happens next. Paul is left in prison here. Church tradition and the pastoral epistles will tell us he was released. And he did travel more. But the story of the gospel outlined in Acts 1:8, from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the uttermost parts of the world, continues. The Acts of the Apostles came to an end, but the Acts of the Disciples continues. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Rick.